This feels like an evasion of public sector equality duty on a matter of public policy. We've discussed the minutiae of planning so much that we've forgotten that the new Southwark plan is the next chapter in an unhappy record of inequality in Southwark for 24 years of my adult life. The Aylesbury is the heart of Southwark's Black, Indigenous and other people of colour communities. Southwark, along with Lambeth, Lewisham and Croydon, has the highest concentration of Afro-Caribbean heritage residents anywhere in London, and as a consequence, the entire country. So when we're talking about public sector equality duties with regards to the demolition of the Aylesbury estate, we are talking about arguably the most important relocation of Black and Brown residents anywhere in the UK. What happens to this community, therefore, whereas raised and socialised in values of anti-racism, intercultural solidarity and mutual aid, matters to every other community like it, the length and breadth of this country. So I asked the inspector if the local authority in Southwark cannot reach dignified agreements with its BIPOC communities, where can those communities lead dignified lives? I think Tony Blair understood this when he gave his maiden speech as PM from the staircase above my youth centre, declaring no more no hope areas, before promptly legislating to consign the concrete on which he stood to 2.5 decades of hopeless mismanagement. The legislative and executive branches of Southwark Council understood this when they were told by Sajid Javid in 2016 that after nearly 25 years, the first Aylesbury CPO breached Human Rights Convention and the public sector equality duty, and the private companies hired to conduct subsequent equality impact assessments understand this when they acknowledge but fail to address the structural inequalities that have been dispossessing ethnic minorities of their homes in Southwark for the best part of a quarter century. So I hope what follows will add context to lived experience, in contrast to the desk research conducted in the Council's most recent equality impact assessments, and in doing so provide insight into the new Southwark plan's modus operandi, RE the Aylesbury specifically, and Southwark more broadly. We, the Indigenous resistance to Aylesbury's gentrification, have done our best to enlist the help of lawyers, academics, journalists, politicians, and charitable organisations for our cause. We've mastered planning policy bibles, mounted legal objections, curated media coverage, fundraised and tabled freedom of information requests. We aren't giving the best years of our lives to stem the tide of inevitable change. We're working simply to set a precedent of dignity and humanity when people of colour lose their homes and the life's work those homes represent. In 2016, it took a Tory minister to chastise our elected councillors for failing to treat us with the requisite humanity enshrined in international human rights law. But a year later, Southwark's appeal greenlit Notting Hill's privatisation of the first development site, only to U-turn this year and sink nearly 200 million to build the housing itself as public housing. In 2020, after Black Lives Matter protests, Southwark pledged to listen to minority communities and enact meaningful change by hosting a series of listening exercises. But 6 months later, there's been zero action or communication on the various inequalities affecting BIPOC communities in the borough raised in those exercises. So I asked the inspector too, how can BIPOC residents expect a fairer future for all or regeneration that works for all, using Southwark's own wording in the new Southwark plan, when the precedent set at a time of unprecedented opportunity was so disappointing. Some 67% of the residents in the area are of BAME heritage and protected by public sector equality duty legislation. The Index of Multiple Deprivation 2015 listed parts of the area in the top 20, 30, and 10% most deprived areas of England. The area has the second highest proportion of housing units in the borough, with no access to private open space, and the highest population density in the borough. 18% of households are overcrowded, and in the context of a pandemic that kills twice as many people of colour, the new Southwark plan's lifting of a density cap on the area action plan does nothing to assure our communities that any additional housing gain will mitigate the risks associated with overcrowding. I asked the inspector if a fairer future for all looks like sustainable mixed communities with opportunities for local people that come from being in the heart of London, why Southwark is pursuing a plan that displaces its local people of colour. Residents that have held on have been subjected to unreasonable and unlawful treatment over the course of the past 24 years. We believe that negligence and dereliction of duty has been used as a weapon to demoralise remaining leaseholders especially, and frustrate them into accepting a lower offer for their homes to save spiralling cost for the mismanaged regeneration. I asked the inspector if Fairer Future for All looks like improved social cohesion by promoting positive relationships and a sense of community and belonging, why managed decline on the estate has a place. Managed decline of the estate has impacted residents' safety, the safety of children and the safety of their guests and visitors. Fire safety, water damage from leaks, continual disruption to hot and cold water service, and break-ins are a regular occurrence. Broken glass, fly tipping, noise pollution, and other forms of antisocial behavior are being attracted to parts of the estate that have been identified as empty as a result of the generalized era of dereliction caused by managed decline and compounded by reduced services during COVID. Residents are trapped in their own homes, unable to enjoy the most basic of living conditions, and in the case of homeowners, unable to rent or sell their homes and move on. So I asked the inspector if the mayor's public sector equality duty, Inclusive London, states that regenerate the most deprived parts of London in a way that supports good growth and opens up opportunities for the most disadvantaged groups, why Southwark has neglected to apply this to Aylesbury. As well as putting BIPOC residents' physical health and safety at risk, immeasurable harm has also been done to residents' mental health. Notwithstanding the clear mental health implications of the pandemic, the ensuing recession and civil unrest of the past year, residents are also trapped in a state of never-ending limbo with only 1 out of 5 phases completed in 24 years. In spite of express written consent in March 2020, Southwark have until very recently delayed meetings, delayed negotiations with organised leaseholders, and delayed buybacks of their homes, despite leaseholders being ready to sell. Worst of all, the threat of a CPO with no certainty on when it will be delivered looms, leaving homeowners with a further state of suspension over costly, invasive, and protracted legal battles. As a result, Black, Indigenous people of colour, and disabled residents are suffering from acute stress, elevated blood pressure, hypertension, migraines, and sleeplessness, which are conditions with severe potential implications for older and disabled individuals. Similarly, children who live on the estate bear witness to the strain on their parents and suffer from high stress levels in turn. Just yesterday, I spoke to the daughter of a leaseholder who was trying to select her 6th form in September. The uncertainty of where she can attend school is making her choose between 3 wildly different locations, and her father reports severe depression and anxiety, which has locked her in her room over the course of the past month because she doesn't know where she's going to be for 6th form. Not only are these children being put at risk by the above physical and mental health issues, but they must also contend with the impending loss of their homes and being uprooted from their community, schools, and social lives. So what should the inspector do about the problem? The council will simply not tell the truth and work in good faith with residents. As Aylesbury residents know, that certain councillors and officers use secret, underhand tactics to progress their aims. The recent case of Leo Pollack impersonating a resident online to discredit local residents and the subsequent praise heaped on him by Kieran Williams while simultaneously accepting his resignation for conduct unbefitting a public official speaks to that generalized air of mistrust and disillusionment. I wonder whether the inspector, on finding out members of his own local council was gaslighting residents online, would readily accept the planning policy laid out by said council as developed in good faith. I think the inspectors should deal with the issue by forcing the council to adhere to public sector equality duty legislation and pause the demolition of the estate. If Southwark were to observe local policy obligations, it would make regeneration work by resolving the rehousing interests of current residents before any further demolition takes place. Residents from protected categories should see the benefits over and above other residents, as well as over and above private interests. That's the point of public sector equality duty. And secondly, for those residents from protected and affected groups who aren't scarred by the last 24 years and who wish to remain, they should be actively engaged in the planning and designing of future housing, whether that's public or private. I think the inspector would do well to get away from taking Southwark and Notting Hill on their word, because the central questions are: who should regeneration of estates serve? Who gets the new homes and who doesn't? What happens to those that leave? Who deserves to have their interests protected? I asked the inspector whether he takes responsibility for holding Southwark and its partner accountable, or will it allow them to shuffle off the responsibility, as it has on so many other issues, to another examination in a public inquiry or a lands tribunal judge? If we take the latter course, we shall be burying one of the most significant housing estates in British history, and with it, all semblance of meaning that remains in our public sector equality duties. That's the end of my statement.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that, Mr. Badu.